All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the California Mortgage Bankers Association, as we call it, Cal MBA, to our webinar for this month that is being sponsored by our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. But before we start, we want to definitely thank our sponsor for our webinars, saying a very special thank you to Prime Lending for sponsoring the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. They are a wonderful sponsor, and for those of you that don't know them, go visit their website. Now, it's my pleasure, and I am so excited that we have for you today an organization called Diversity Crew. This organization, I must tell you, they are totally and completely committed to diversity, equity, and the inclusion journey, and helping those of us that are working in the world of business, and now they are coming specifically to the mortgage industry to give us some assistance and some help, which is going to be just, I think, so informative and valuable to those that will be coming on, that are on right now. I know that there's some more that are joining us. We are in one of those very, very down times in our industry as we have gone down through the years. But this one is hitting us, feels like extra hard. Maybe it's because we're coming off of all the other crises that the country has dealt with, from COVID to the civil unrest, to all these things that have been happening in our country. And now we are experiencing in our industry, the mortgage industry, the real estate industry, this downturn in our production. And so this diversity group, the professionals that are part of this organization, I think are going to give us a wealth of information today that's going to help us to see some opportunities that will actually speak to our bottom line. I'm just believing that. I truly do believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion does in fact speak directly to the bottom line of every organization, in addition to all the other wonderful things that it can do for us as a society. And with no further ado, I want to start by introducing you to the speakers that are going to join us and present for us today. Our first speaker is going to be Talicia Walton. Talicia is the Senior Director, DEI Client Success at Diversity Crew. And Talicia has over 20 years working with groups to maximize the ripple effect they can make in our society. And we know as the mortgage industry, we carry a very heavy responsibility in our country because we help to provide the financing that Americans need for home ownership. We help provide the financing that is for the basic commercial infrastructure in our country. And so Talicia has helped to maximize groups that are working in all different spaces to make all this better for our overall society. She is a strategic thinker. She's influential bridge builder. She's a ideation guru and a cultural maximizer. So I'm so glad to have Talicia with us. Our next speaker is going to be Katia Delgado. Katia is a data scientist whose experience includes over 15 years of market research. She combines formal training in research methodologies with expertise and passion for DE&I, creating custom studies designed to bring to the voice of the underrepresented communities to life and build inclusive organizational cultures. And that's something that we definitely want to listen to and glean from as we learn to reach out to the broader community, broader marketplaces for home ownership. And then we have Eve, wonderful Eve Mayer, and she is the CEO of Diversity Crew. Eve is an author, she's a speaker, and she's a serial entrepreneur. It is with great pleasure that I now turn today's webinar over to these incredible ladies that are going to share with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us as well. We are delighted to join you in this endeavor this afternoon on our time here in Central Time. And we're going to just jump in and get started real quick with a poll. If we can go ahead and get that poll up on the screen, that would be great. In a moment, you'll see a question. We're just curious, leaning in with you. How does your organization view diversity? We'll leave the poll open for about 60 seconds or so, give you time to read through the question and those answers there and go ahead and submit. And then round about 45 seconds or so, we'll wrap this up and share the responses back with everyone so we can get a pulse check of who's in the room with us today, because we're excited to have you. Samantha, how are we doing?
We're doing good. We have about 20 responses so far.
Wonderful, wonderful. Keep it up. Everyone's alert. I love it. And are we nearing our 45-second mark?
We are.
Wonderful. So there's still time for some of you. If you're choosing between either one, it's okay. Just choose one. We're just doing a little pulse check here in the morning. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll then and share our results. And if you wouldn't mind reading out the results, Samantha.
Absolutely. So for our poll results, we have 0% diversity is not a current priority for us. 14% says we value the idea of diversity, but had not done any work. 29% says we have started diversity work, but do not have a strategy. 43% say we have implemented several initiatives to improve diversity. And 14% say we have policies and strategies in place to strengthen diversity.
Thank you so much. That is excellent, excellent feedback. We're so glad to have such a mix within the audience today. So some of this information we're going to go over is foundational in the beginning here, but then we're going to broaden our scope so that you gain a better insight and understanding of what diversity group is and how we can best interact. So let us move on to the next slide here to talk about that first question. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? I'm just pausing while the poll gets ended so that you all can see our screen again. All right. So at that 50,000 foot level, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a transformation process with all the dimensions related to diversity around differences. It's a business imperative. It's a comprehensive approach that requires integration that's permeated throughout the organization. It's going to be aligned to your core values. It's going to include an effective communication plan that's throughout your organization. But what DEI isn't, it's not about race or gender. It's not a short-term or an incremental change. It's not just a compliance-based numbers focus either, because you don't want to just count heads. You want to invest to know what's inside of them. So if we break down DEI at that 10,000 foot level, at its core, diversity is a fact of human experience. It's not an outcome. We recognize diversity as an individual characteristic that defines us. It goes beyond the demographic descriptors. Diversity is the intersection of our individual backgrounds and experiences and the unique perspectives that we all have as a result of that. So equity then recognizes that a one size does not fit all. And it's not the solution that we should take and approach, because equity means that recognizing that we all don't start from the same point of the race, if you will. And we must acknowledge and make adjustments for those imbalances. So inclusion then encourages different people to contribute and make decisions in ways that can make some change, some systematic change at that. So while diversity describes an individual, inclusion is all about the collective. It is the active and intentional and ongoing engagement with diversity. And as we move to the next slide, I want to talk to you about those components that make up diversity. DEI is broken into 6 different components that can drive, that you can dive into from a company standpoint, regardless of your size, as well as the importance of each component for your company, what could be your focus. If it's focused around recruitment, talent, and acquisition, or your employee experience, that training and development part of it, your customer and employee branding, community investment, or even the supplier diversity side of it. Narrowing in your focus around all these aspects of the employee life cycle will definitely heighten and enhance your DEI efforts. But don't forget that your goals should be developed around each component, especially easy wins to gain traction around DEI. Additionally, these components should be incorporated into a larger strategic plan of your organization and share with employees so that you are transparent about your efforts. So as we talk about in our next slide, why does it matter to your production and bottom line? A focus on DEI drives improvements in company performance, innovation, employee engagement and retention, public perception of your company's brand, which are all great things. And then also, in return, it reduces employee turnover, loss of productivity and engagement, and the need for public relation interventions. So as you can see, when you make diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority, every facet of your organization benefits. And now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Katia Delgato.
Great, thank you. On the next slide, we often get the question about ROI of DEI, return on investment. A lot of times when organizations are concerned about their bottom line, and diversity seems like a nice thing to do, but it's not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. You see, as Talisa mentioned, DEI efforts have a myriad of benefits. One of them is employee engagement. Several different studies are putting the engagement numbers at about a third, 30 to 34%, which means that only about a third of your employees are working at their full capacity. And about half of your organization's employees are currently looking for a new job. So with these data in mind, we can put very solid dollar numbers around the value of engagement. You see that the lost productivity of disengaged or non-engaged employees is about 18% of their annual salary. And if you have a global organization with tens of thousands of employees making about $50,000 each, disengagement cost is over $60 million a year. On the next slide, you see that a lot of organizations are realizing the benefits of being gender diverse, ethnically diverse, and we are able to express these advantages and link them in real dollar numbers. Here is an example from McKinsey, why diversity matters. So you see that likelihood of financial performance above the industry peers, and gender diverse companies are doing 15% better, ethnically diverse companies 35% better. There is a myriad of studies just like this showing that diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are have a positive impact on everything from productivity to innovation to profitability of organizations. On the next slide, I put together some stats for you about the growing industry, and it's really is the global market for diversity and inclusion. It's projected to reach over 15 billion by 2026, growing in double digits every year. There is such a thing as CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion Pledge that's been signed for by more than 2,200 CEOs to date. companies started including DEI in their earnings. Just a couple of years ago, in 2019, 3 years ago, that number was about 4%, and now 4 out of 10 organizations are including these metrics. HR leaders are very aware of the value of DEI. It's skyrocketing to the list of the priorities, and you can definitely see this reflected in the number of job postings for diversity recruiters, for DEI practitioners, for CDO roles. It's 800% increase in the last year or so. So this all seems very encouraging, and why are we all talking about it if everybody is doing it? On the next slide, you see that despite all this energy and investment of resources around DEI, systematic implementation and measurement of these efforts are still lagging. There is significant effort to put more budget and put more resources in your DEI. However, in employee engagement and climate surveys and research with your stakeholders, your members, your employees, we're still seeing inclusive environment, belonging metrics lagging. Only 65% of employees say that their managers, 35% of employees say that their managers foster an inclusive environment, and 65% do not. And there very rarely do we see a systematic approach to these initiatives. So we absolutely believe that data has a place in your DEI efforts. On the next slide, please. There's a lot of opportunities to incorporate data in your DEI. It helps you in a myriad of ways. A lot of times we see that DEI initiatives do not have a structure and have a nice to have sense to them, and it's very difficult to understand, are they really having a positive impact on your environment, on your employees? So wrapping data around your DEI strategy can help you provide these objective pillars that you can use to measure the efforts, to direct it, to really benchmark it. One of the most important things and the reasons why some organizations are reluctant to adopt the scientific approach to DEI is it's important to allow for the possibility that the data you will receive back might disprove your hypothesis or tell you something that you might not be ready or comfortable to hear, but it's so important to identify those moments. So on the next slide, we've listed a few of the benefits that objective data strategy can provide for you. So it's everything from identifying opportunities. I like to give an example of, if your organization only measures satisfaction and your top 2-box score is 90%, the first instinct is to pat yourself on the back and say how great we're doing. But unless you're digging in this data and understanding who are in that 10%, if all of your 10% are women of color, you would never know the disparity unless you really look into the data. And it allows you to hear the voice of your stakeholders, your employees, maybe homeowners who are first-time homebuyers who are struggling currently. It allows you to measure the soft metrics we talk about. What is inclusion? How do we measure the belonging? Do my employees have a voice? Does everybody have access to the same resources? That equity that can be difficult to grasp sometimes. And the data, once you start collecting it, once you start getting it, it can help you inform a long-term strategy that can be interwoven with your organizational strategy. And then finally, creating that dashboard that allows you to monitor. The old adage of what gets measured gets done is very true for DEI efforts as well. On the next slide, here is an example of a case study that we did for one of our clients, and I encourage you to go to the Diversity Crew website and download one of our case studies. They're completely free, and they illustrate very well the process that I'm describing, how we go from the process of discovery and identifying those opportunities in DEI space to helping establish internal understanding of DEI, helping organizations create the environment of psychological safety, which is so important for inclusion, increasing diversity in numbers, whether it's a member society for members or employees, helping to accelerate sourcing, and many, many more. So I think if we can drop the link to our case studies in the chat, that would be fantastic. At this point, I would like to hand it over to Eve, our CEO, and she can tell you a little bit more about what Diversity Crew does, because we love numbers, but that's not the only thing we're good at.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's a privilege to be here. Diversity Crew, the people that are talking to us right now about this, we work with all kinds of organizations, both in your industry and beyond. So we've seen a few things. And so we're going to tell you a bit about what we do. And I think it'll also help you when you're thinking about the difference between using internal resources or external resources, when you might consider adding on to maybe something in the organization that you don't feel you have at the moment. So we'll actually start with a video to tell you a little bit about who we are, and then I'll come back and chat with you some more.
Diversity Crew is a company made up of equal partners focusing on diversity and inclusion. Our role at Diversity Crew is to create equity for an incredible tapestry of humans.
So many organizations want to take bold steps forward, treating humans better, but these are complex issues that require great care.
We create strategy and oversee actions that lead to more satisfied team members and customers who believe in your vision.
Diversity Crew provides recruiting, storytelling, communications, training, speaking, strategy, supplier diversity, and company culture.
Diversity Crew helps your company amplify voices that need to be heard.
We know how to stimulate allyship.
We can help you build better opportunities for people who have been underserved.
We can help you create compensation plans that are equal pay for equal work and company culture that truly serves your team.
Diversity Crew can help your organization communicate more effectively internally and externally.
It's okay if you don't know how to create a perfect new world. Neither do we.
But if you agree that now is the time to find ways to treat humans even better, we're here to help.
Please drop us a line at letsgo@diversitycrew.com.
Thank you so much for playing that video for us. So we're basically a consortium who focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our role is to help treat people better, all people that we understand are living in a world of intersectionality, all people who may not have been seen as a whole person. We want to help all people understand each other and treat each other better. We approach each organization and individual where they are and help them move forward. So a lot of times when you get into diversity work, maybe you look at the organization and say, okay, we're already here, or wow, we're at the very beginning of this journey and we know nothing. And rarely are either of those true. It's really hard for an organization to look at itself and know where they are, kind of like it is for humans, right? For us to know exactly where we are along this journey. And that's one of the reasons that Katya spoke so much about data and its importance to really not only know where you think the organization is, but to measure everyone and divide it by demographics to understand where the organization really is, especially according to the feelings of those people in different demographics. So we can move forward to the next slide. So what kind of companies engage this kind of work? It really is every type of company. We work in law firms, we work in academic organizations, companies that focus on health, that focus on finances, that focus on media, that focus on the military. You can see all kind of organizations here that we work with, but it is not a particular type of organization that is doing DEI work. Like we talked about, it's growing exponentially. There's more spend on it, both internally with staff and externally with support, training. But there's really no organization that we can say really hasn't been looking into DEI in some way. You'll see the American Society of Hematology, Habitat for Humanity, a lot of nonprofits. But then you'll see B2B organizations and B2C organizations, business to consumer and business to business organizations. Everyone, it seems, not everyone, there are still companies that have not yet, like we saw on our poll earlier, but all types of organizations are diving into this or are pretty mature in where they are. We can move to the next slide. So what does a company like Diversity Crew do? So there's really only 3 things that we do. Number 1 is consulting. So you can engage Diversity Crew or a company like Diversity Crew for all kinds of assessments, right? Where are you at in pay equity? Where are you at in how people feel psychological safety is being treated? Strategy development, how do you, once you have all this data and have all these numbers, what are you actually going to do year 1, year 2, year 3? And that's usually a culture change, an organizational development transformation that doesn't happen overnight. So you decide you really want to change something in your organization. That's going to probably be a combination of internal hires, internal people, internal committees, and perhaps an outside firm that's going to be helping you with that. Leadership preparation, you're only going to be as strong as your weakest leader in DEI, just like that applies to everything in your organization. Dashboard development, looking at measurements of where you are and comparing it through periods of where you're going 6 months, 18 months later. ERG program development. A lot of organizations already have ERGs. Some are just at the very beginning of developing their ERGs. But one of the biggest things that they do is they don't ask their people what ERGs are wanted. And one of the things we've seen over the past couple of years is that one of the biggest in-demand ERGs are groups of parents. People want to lean on each other, and I think a lot of that has to do with what we've all gone through during COVID and that parents need more support. But that just goes to show that a lot of times ERGs are developed and people have not been asked what they want. So ERGs are developed and it's perhaps a small group of people because it wasn't what people were really looking for. The other issue in ERGs a lot of times is there's too many of them. Organization will choose to develop ERGs and they want everybody to feel included and taken care of. And by doing that, they overdevelop ERGs and end up with too many ERGs. And that's ERG, by the way, is an employee resource group, just in case your organization doesn't have them yet or calls them something different. Sometimes you'll get BRGs, business resource groups, and sometimes they'll have affinity groups. They'll be named something completely different. Supplier diversity program development. This is when we partner with the supplier diversity organization. A lot of times in supplier diversity, things haven't even really been measured yet, right? They haven't been looked at yet. And so if you don't know where you are in supplier diversity, it's difficult to grow businesses from people of color, businesses that are women-owned business, veteran-owned business, if you don't know what you already have. So that first step is always figuring out where you actually are. Communications planning, you'll see a lot of times, a lot of organizations putting out statements around a particular issue that they believe is DEI related and other organizations remaining quiet, putting out a DEI statement on their website of where they sit in this work, right? And so communicating that both internally and externally is a big area of focus for a lot of organizations. And it's not always easy, right? To know what to say, when to say it, how to say it, when to stay quiet, and when to take a stand. It's very difficult, and a lot of organizations look for help in that. Workforce education, coaching, and mentoring. We actually have 6 certified coaches, and these are executive and business coaches, but they also work with emerging leaders. I think it's so important for you as an organization to look at, yes, the leaders, the board members, the executives of your organization, but what about at all levels? What about in different verticals of the organization? What about those emerging leaders, those people who are already leading in DEI, that you can capture that passion and that they can serve as a leader in the organization? They deserve to be coached. They deserve to be grown. Implementation and accountability, facilitation, and so much more. Any area of consulting in DEI is what we focus on. And then I'll go to the other side. We have our DEI Speakers Bureau, and we have about 47 speakers who talk on 100+ areas that are ready to go. So it might be religious diversity, it might be allyship. A big area that companies are looking for this year is remote work, right? Because we've gone to this very different world than we were in a few years ago for a lot of people. And then another thing that is in high demand right now is psychological safety, understanding the mental health, the mental wellness of employees in the organization. We do keynote speeches, experiential workshops, and all kind of events, anything from retreats to conferences to in-house events to ERG speakers, both in person and virtually, depending on the organization. And then more and more companies are certifying their people in DEI. They're doing typically the committee that is focused on DEI, or emerging and executive leaders that are getting certified. Some companies even choose to certify 5% of their entire organization in DEI. And so our program is a DEI certification that begins with 20 e-learning courses, and they're all in an on-demand format online. It's an accessible format. One of the interesting things that we saw in DEI certification is there wasn't a lot of accessibility to those who are neurodiverse, to those who are hearing or visually impaired. So we built the first program, the first DEI certification that was fully accessible. We also make sure that the information can be reached at any time. So sometimes you'll want to go back and review something. So perhaps you've watched a course on health equity or mindfulness, and you want to go and have a chat with your organization about that. You're going to want to go back and review those things before you do it. And we have all of our information accessible indefinitely. The other thing you need is continuing education. When you're a leader in DEI, or you're becoming a leader in DEI, new things happen, and we're all learning together. So Stop Asian Hate is something that is still relatively a relatively newer term, and that people need information on. We typically have our certified members asking for us to do a certain presentation on a topic, whether it's African American history, Juneteenth. A lot of people still don't know what Juneteenth really is or what the history of that is, but we're always learning, and we're always putting forth our people with lived and professional experience in those areas to speak about those topics. In our certification, we also have a LinkedIn group for certified members. One thing I want to encourage you to do is never expect that the person in charge of DEI or the people in charge of DEI have everything figured out. They may have lived in professional experience in one area, but be very new. So for example, maybe they're very accustomed to women empowerment, but religious diversity is not their area of specialty. Maybe they're, have lived in professional experience in LGBTQ, but allyship or mindfulness are not their particular area. And they always need people to trust, right? They always need people that they can go to. So look for those leaders in your organization who have particular lived and professional experience in those areas, in different areas, so they can learn from each other. And then look for organizations that can fill in the gaps for the areas that they haven't quite mastered yet or need more opportunities to move their journey forward on. We also do group reflection sessions anytime an organization has more than 10 certified members at a time. So we work together with them to make sure that they move forward as a journey, right? So a lot of this is so much about that conversation and the listening actively between you and your fellow employees. To really understand where you are, misconceptions that you may have had. A real vulnerability from leaders is so important in this work. it's really necessary, and it's so different than I think we were in the workplace 20, 30 years ago. I don't remember ever as a leader or a VP or a C-level executive in the past being asked to be vulnerable. I still think that's a very new thing for many of us, and it's something that is we must practice, right? Because we can't expect honesty and vulnerability from our employees if we're not that way as leaders. So we would love for you to visit diversitycrew.com. Our prices are actually on our homepage, and all of the topics we just talked about are there. We also have a lot of free resources. We have a diversitydictionary.com, which you can just look up terms, and it can help you identify what is the LGBTQ, what does the T stand for in LGBTQ+, right? What is ableism? This can be found at diversitycrew.com under our DEI dictionary. We also have a library. So let's say that you want to look up a book to start learning about gender neutral pronouns. Why do people at the bottom of their email have she, her, hers, or they, them? If your organization is looking at how to roll that out and you want to just start with a book, we have a library that has books that are a good beginning place to look at. And we can go to the next slide. So I think a lot of times when we talk to a particular industry, what they want to know is like, what is my competitor? What is my partner company doing? So we just listed some of the services, some of the things that companies in the financial industry are doing, what we're doing for them. So unconscious bias training over the past couple of years has been the #1 training that companies usually start at. When they think of DEI, unconscious bias training is usually the #1 thing they will ask for, right? So we get a lot of requests and do a lot of unconscious bias training. The second thing, when they get into consulting, they'll first look at a DEI climate survey. So how do employees feel? What are they hoping for? How are these feelings divided up into demographics so we can actually know what to do and how to move forward? And then another big area, especially in finance, is leading inclusively remotely. Across the board, we're seeing in most industries, I wouldn't say, retail as much or restaurant as much, but leading inclusively focused on remote work. How do we really create a culture in a remote world? How do we make people feel included? How do we lead inclusively? LGBTQ literacy. So a lot of times people are at the very beginning of their journey in this area and they want to have a better understanding. They want to have level set learning and be more inclusive in LGBTQ. Religious diversity training, I think that is becoming more popular. And it's interesting to me because I think a lot of times religious diversity training was never something a company did until they got in trouble, right? Until someone said something or did something inappropriate in relation to religion. They really weren't forward thinking enough to train people in religious diversity. Like we talked about before, remote workplace training is something that we're doing a lot in the financial industry and in most industries. I've seen a lot of growth in mental wellness series. So this is, typically training that starts around psychological safety. What is psychological safety? How do we embrace psychological safety in the organization? But then it goes further because I think over the past couple of years at one level or another, people have struggled in a new world due to the pandemic, due to social reckoning in this country, in the US. And there's been a lot of struggles with keeping our mental health. I think also you see that it's more acceptable to talk about mental health both in the workplace and outside the workplace, which is leading to people consciously becoming, seeing a want from their employer to create environments where they can be more mentally healthy. And then culture transformation coaching, right? So you want to change a culture in an organization. That's not just done by an organization like ours. That has to be taught to an extent, trained to an extent by an organization like ours. But then it's the internal people every day who are carrying out that culture transformation. So those are the things that we're doing in the financial services industry, in case you were curious about, what organizations are doing. And we can move forward to the next slide. I actually think we have a poll right before this, so we'll go ahead and take a poll. Oh, I think maybe I'm wrong, but I'll go through this first, and then we'll take one more poll. Factors sabotaging DEI efforts. So what gets in the way, right? We hear people talking about this, but what's really getting in the way? Number one would be a lack of DEI strategy. Just like if you have a plan to do something, but you have no strategy behind it, sticking to it and knowing that's going well, understanding that it's successful or not successful is pretty darn difficult. Not engaging stakeholders at every level on critical DEI conversations. You cannot be successful in this only talking to your leaders, right? A lot of times leaders think that everything is great and everything is fine because they have not heard from all levels of the organization. Or the leaders may think everything is horrible and absolutely terrible, and they're not right because they haven't heard from people from all levels of the organization. Another factor sabotaging DEI efforts is the focus on diversity alone without improvement of internal culture. A lack of common language and clear goals to unite stakeholders. It's interesting that we start with the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion that you heard Talisa do, because so many times we will ask a company, you know, what does equity mean to you? And we'll ask 100 people and get 100 different answers. And so they have to be on the same page for what they're striving for with the common language. DEI as crisis management, reactive programs and response to societal events. So something will happen in the world, a company will respond to it publicly, they will do nothing internally, they will do nothing besides make a statement. Statements just aren't enough. There has to be action, there has to be thought. One-off DEI trainings in lieu of comprehensive and systematic approach. We do trainings and speaking all the time. They can be very effective, but they are not going to be responsible. An hour-and-a-half session is not going to be responsible for an entire organizational transformation. It can be the beginning of a step, but it's not going to change everything in an hour-and-a-half. No consistent advocacy or a DEI champion among organizations leaders. Once again, your weakest leader in this area is the person who is leading this charge, and you have to have support from the top to make sure that they are being mindful and that they are advocates for DEI. Not viewing DEI as part of a long-term strategy, not committing resources to DEI efforts. So we hear so many times that there's a chief diversity officer or there's a DEI director, and it's almost like a figurehead to look like the company's just solved DEI because that person is there. And the problem is when you look closer, that person has not been enabled to be successful because they don't have a budget, they don't have a staff, they don't have one or the other, or a little bit in one of those areas, and they haven't been given the time or the money they need to develop a strategy. And then not tying DEI efforts to performance and not measuring progress. Once again, like Katya said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, you can't know that it's working. So measuring from the very beginning and then measuring as you go along the strategy that you have created is just so important. And now I think we can do the polling question. I messed up before. There we go. So how helpful was the information presented today? We want to know the truth, right? Did you already know all this stuff? Was it very helpful, somewhat helpful, not very helpful, or not helpful at all? We think we understood, especially at the beginning when you answered of where you are in your journey, and we hope we've given you some more information to take you along that journey. And right after this, we're actually going to also be doing questions and answers. So just take a moment to fill this poll out, and I will turn this over to Samantha.
I believe, Eve, while Samantha's getting the poll together, that we're just going to leave this one open again for about 60 seconds. While the percentages are tallying up back there, Samantha will give us some guidance on if we're reaching, 50% of the audience, 60% of the audience, and leaving it down.
67% that have voted so far.
Wonderful. That's exciting.
73%. Look at that.
Just in the blink of an eye. So we're hoping that maybe in the next 10 seconds we can close down this poll then. Yeah. There's still time.
About 73%.
Love it, love it. How about we go ahead and close out the poll then and share the results with everyone?
45% say this is very helpful. We have another 45% that says this is somewhat helpful, and 9% said that this was not very helpful.
I appreciate all of the feedback. We are opening up this next part to really dive into some of the questions that have been on your mind. So go ahead and find that chat area, and we'll come back on, turn our cameras on here, and I'm saying chat, but it's probably questions on your side in your poll.
Yeah, it's a Q&A question box that you should all be able to see. Please feel free to send in any questions you have for our presenters in that dialogue box.
All righty. So as we wait on that, questions to come in, Samantha, when you get some, just go ahead and start sharing.
We have one that's come in. It's for, I think, Talisa. It says, where do I start?
That is an excellent question. When I think you might want to hide the poll though, then that way everybody can see us.
And Talisa, I can help with that too.
Oh, wonderful. I think when it comes to an inclusion and climate journey, there's a lot of steps involved, and there are about 8 questions that I have come across that really can help you narrow down on where to start. Really, it's around why do we want to do this in the first place? Really honing in on your motivation as to why you're going to go down this path of DE&I. And then you want to figure out what's your vision, what's your passion and commitment around this. Then you want to ask yourself, where are we now? Have we taken an in-depth inquiry of our assessment of our organization, our leadership team, our ability to lean into this conversation, if you will? So how far are we away from where we want to be? Really understanding that magnitude of that gap that exists after you've gotten an in-depth inquiry and data. And then what do we intend to do about it? Realistically, how are you going to come to a resolve around this? And then what are your organizations thinking about doing that we need to unlearn? You know, thinking about this learning and transformation that needs to happen within your organization. We all have to learn, unlearn, and relearn things in the course of our jobs. So then the next question is all about how does an inclusive culture link to our business strategies? We don't want to create these strategies in a vacuum. They really need to meet your business objectives and be tied in so that it's seen throughout the entire organization as that journey that you're going on for your company's growth and success. And then lastly, what conscious oversight will we put in place? How are we going to be perpetual stewards of what we're doing? What we're saying that we're leaning into here. I mean, be intentional about it. So I think those are some key questions that one can start to consider when they begin to start down this path.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. I love this question. How do I know if my DEI initiatives are effective at changing company culture? I think, Eve, that might be one that you can help answer.
Sure. So I know we've said this before, but if you don't measure it, you can't really know. And so it's so important to get a baseline at the very beginning. If I was starting a DEI journey at an organization, I would ask my people how they felt first before I did anything. If I don't know how my people feel, if they're frustrated or they're ecstatic, if I haven't broken them up by demographics, if I haven't asked them what kind of ERGs and what kind of programs they want, I think they're going to feel very frustrated when I begin to spend money on all kind of programs that may not be what they were looking for or needed in the first place. And so how do I know if it works? Is by having a baseline measurement and then measuring again to make sure that you're on the right track and listening to your people. Sometimes it's shushing and just listening to what they have to say.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then Katya, we have one last question that's come in. And just another reminder, please feel free to use the Q&A dialog box. But the next question is, how do we measure progress? What training should we implement?
Great question. It's when we talk about training, a lot of times people are surprised to learn that we've been doing DEI training or diversity training for about 60 years, since 1960s. And there is actually research evidence that diversity training in a vacuum does not work at changing organizational culture. So unless, I know we sound like a broken record, but listen to your stakeholders, listen to your employees, identify those opportunities in DEI space. Don't throw money and resources toward canned training without first understanding what are those pain points. Once if you conduct engagement surveys, take a look at them with the DEI lens. Is there an opportunity to understand how inclusive your culture is? Is there opportunity to understand whether everyone in your organization has the same opportunity to succeed, has the same access to resources? There is always a chance to build those metrics right from the beginning. That way you're not only measuring satisfaction or net promoter score, the two very beloved metrics in the corporate world, but also taking a look at those DEI, the soft metrics, looking at your diversity, your equity, your inclusion, and then having collected and analyzed these touch points, understand what training can solve for the issues. So my advice is don't do training unless you know what you're solving for.
That's great, thank you. I think I'll double check to see if anything else has come in. But that is the last question we have.
Okay. Well, Samantha, since that's the last question we have right now, if anyone else pops in a question, please interrupt me. But
okay.
Whenever I moderate sessions, and I thank each and every one of you, Talisa, Kadia, Eve, thank you so much for the information that you share. And I think it's important. I said that I told the people I sent out the links to that I was excited about this because our mortgage industry right now, we're going through a difficult time, challenging time, because of the interest rate hikes that have dramatically affected the production in our industry. So we have companies that are losing employees that are going because there's not the lack of work. We have companies that are laying off employees. But what you have offered here to our audience for the mortgage industry is an opportunity to actually take some of the time that they now have, because things are slow in our industry, unfortunately, but they are. And that is to truly look into what are the opportunities that diversity really does offer us. As you were going through your presentations, I was taking some notes here for the mortgage industry. And that is, so much of our industry now is working remotely, like so many businesses are since the pandemic. And so a lot of the mortgage companies have continued to allow their employees to work remotely. So how effective is that remote workplace actually working for you? Those employees that you are hiring that are diverse groups, do you understand the dynamics of the home place that they're working remotely in? And are they in fact able to be as productive and as effective as they can be? And are you providing that support? I think those are some of the things that I got out that Diversity Crew could help you to kind of look into to see, is that in fact working well for your remote employees? And then you talked about unconscious bias training. Unconscious bias training is always important within the mortgage industry. Other industries, yes, but right now I'm in the mortgage industry and we're talking with the mortgage industry. And it affects the consumers that our industry engages with. And if there's unconscious biases there, and we know that we have regulations that monitor us as to how well we are actually serving the American public with home ownership financing, those that perhaps are not getting the financing that they deserve to have because perhaps of some unconscious biases. There may be unconscious biases that we know we have that's actually keeping some people from even accessing the financing that's available in the mortgage industry because of how they perceive the industry. And so, in the companies, and then we have the LGBTQ community. Once again, these are not only employees, but they're borrowers as well. They're consumers as well that are seeking home financing. And so all of these dynamics together, I think I want to encourage those that were able to come on to truly go look at the diversity group and talk with them. They've already shared with you that they have the skill set, they have the intellectual knowledge, they have the experience to help you to craft a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, initiatives that truly can help you to grow your company. Grow it not just from the inside, the internal side, but also how you can reach your customer base, how you can broaden your market base, how can you talk to communities that you've never been into before, how can you learn about those communities and then know how to market to them, how to talk with them, how to help them. I loved what I saw in one of your slides. I think it was one that Eve, when you were talking about the company, and you indicated that you are an organization that wants to build an incredible tapestry of humans. I mean, we have got all spectrums of people in this country. And we have historically seen over and over and over again in the surveys that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac does of the housing desires that consumers have, it is still extraordinarily high. Well over 70–80% of consumers still desire to own a home. That's a lot of customers, y'all. So we need to learn how to reach a broad spectrum. So please take advantage of the resources and the availability of the diversity crew and go on to the California Mortgage Bankers Association's website and look at the other resources that are available. They've got a dictionary, y'all, that tell us about how to understand all these new acronyms and things that are out there. That's available on their website for free. They've got a library. So take advantage of these things, okay? And I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but you know what? We're down now in the industry. We got time. Spend maybe some of this time to try to do this so that we can continue to move forward. But that's all I've got, Samantha. I thank you all once again for presenting, for joining us. And I think we're at the end.
We are. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for the diversity crew. You all did a wonderful job. And we just really are grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Samantha.